Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope you're well, I hope you are ready for the Belgian Grand Prix as we are just a few days away. I cannot wait. It seems like this summer break has been so incredibly long. But today I'd like to talk about Nikita Mazepin. A few days ago I did a video where I compared each of the drivers to their teammate and sort of had a look down the field and compared who was the best driver in each team, whether that other driver could catch up to their teammate over the course of the second half of the season. And I didn't talk too much about Haas because, well, just looking at these stats here, it's very one-sided. 9-2 to Mick, 9-2 in the races as well. And then points-wise, neither Haas driver has been able to get points. Mick has been the closest, being able to finish 12th. But it got me thinking, Haas in general, and especially Nikita Mazepin, have been under a lot of fire this season. And, they are both rookies in this Haas team. And personally, Nikita Mazepin has been the driver that everybody has loved to hate. There's been a lot of different memes and so on about Nikita Mazepin throughout the season, but I wanted to delve into his stats, actually look at Nikita Mazepin and try and be fairly subjective about it, but try to see, has he actually improved over the course of the first 11 races? Is Nikita Mazepin going to be a driver that we look back on in a few years' time as a flash in the pan, someone who came in for money and then disappeared out of the sport? Or is he going to be someone who can improve and eventually get to the level of a Formula 1 driver and sustain a reasonable career in Formula 1? And let's start off in Bahrain, because let's be honest, it wasn't the start to the career in Formula 1 you'd want as Nikita Mazepin. In qualifying, nearly a second down on his teammate already, and nearly 2 seconds down off of being able to get into Q2. Now, a Haas in Q2 is a rare thing indeed, but I thought it'd be interesting just to see how far they were off of that capability. Obviously taking into account that the Haas car is absolutely abysmal. But the main thing here is he was already a second down on Mick Schumacher in the first qualifying of the season. And then obviously in the race, he went on to DNF, spin out after a couple of corners. So we didn't really know what his race pace was going to be like. And straight away, people started to jump onto him because he'd made that mistake on the first lap of the first Grand Prix. He put himself in the shop window as someone to be made fun of. But we hadn't actually seen his race pace yet. So I was ready to hold out and sort of see how it went for him over the next couple of races. But then we had Imola. He was 0.5 seconds off of Mick, 0.9 seconds off of P15, and then we had a wet race. He finished P17, but in a wet race, there wasn't really, again, anything we could take away from that. Everybody made mistakes. We had Mick Schumacher making mistakes as well, and we couldn't gain anything really tangible from the race in Imola either. So we're 2 races in, and we haven't seen Nikita Mazepin do anything whatsoever. We finally get to Portugal and we get to see his race pace. He didn't qualify well again, but he was probably about 0.5 seconds off of Mick. Yeah, he's 0.5 seconds off of Mick and 1.2 seconds off of P15, which was Raikkonen in qualifying this time round. But I think this is the stark thing. Yes, I was expecting him to be slower in qualifying over the course of the season. We saw that from the first race. But again, look how much slower he is per lap from Mick Schumacher. This was his fastest lap of the race at 1:23.6. Mick Schumacher 8/10, nearly 9/10 faster per lap. And he's nearly 4 seconds slower than the fastest lap of the race, which was Bottas. He is losing multiple seconds per lap every single lap over the course of a dry race. That is a really poor start to his Formula 1 career. We've had 2 races where we haven't seen anything from him. And in his third race, first of all, he got in the way of Perez and got a blue flag warning. And then secondarily, he's nearly a second slower than his teammate every single lap. And it was actually Spain where I made my video on Nikita Mazepin. Spain was where my concerns really arose and the criticism reached probably its peak. He got in the way of a driver in every single session. In FP1, it was Leclerc. He spun out, ruined Leclerc's lap, but Leclerc on the radio said Mazepin will never change. And I think this is where, realistically, we have to see a turning point from Mazepin soon because the other drivers along the grid are now starting to make jokes out of him. Mazepin will never change. He got in the way of Raikkonen in the pit lane, and Raikkonen made a little snarky comment afterwards in FP2 as well. Stroll, he cut up in FP3, and Stroll says he has no idea what he is doing and gives him the middle finger. And then again, it's getting very heated. We've also got Quali, puts himself in the apex in front of Lando, gets a warning for that. Then in the race, there's the blue flag incident with Hamilton, and Toto has to get on the radio. Spain was a real low point for Mazepin, and it was at this point that I was genuinely really concerned about the safety of him being on the track, and also other drivers starting to notice that he's probably not going to step up to being a Formula One quality worthy of driver. And Monaco just sort of nailed that in for me when he wasn't able to change his settings during the race. Now, before Monaco, everybody said it was going to be Nikita Mazepin that smashed it into the wall. It actually ended up being Mick Schumacher and Leclerc who smashed it into the wall. And it was a pretty clean race all in all when it came to Monaco. But he couldn't change his settings during the race, and actually said this on the radio to his team when they were trying to get him to change some of the settings on the steering wheel, but he couldn't because he was so close to the wall, so worried about knocking the car into one of the barriers, that he just left the settings as they were. And this was my cause for concern. You know, can Mazepin actually, after 5 races in Formula One, hasn't really shown anything in terms of pace. The other drivers on the grid are getting frustrated with him, and he's so far off his teammate. Can he finally turn it around? And Azerbaijan actually showed an inkling of hope. In terms of Azerbaijan, he was just 0.1 seconds off of Mick in qualifying. And it is a long lap around Azerbaijan. That is very, very close indeed. He got a 14th place finish. And actually, if we look at his times, they're not too bad. He's finally nearly 3 seconds behind the leader, which means, you know, he's maybe 2 to 1 seconds behind the midfield pack, but he's closing up to the likes of Mick Schumacher, Giovinazzi, Latifi. And this actually gave me an inkling of hope. After Monaco was realistically the nail in the coffin for me, with Mazepin not being able to step up to this level, Azerbaijan just showed that shining light, a 147.7, only a 10th behind his teammate. I thought maybe this could be the one. Yes, he did almost kill his teammate and himself, but apart from that, I'd say Azerbaijan is probably his best race so far this season, and showed maybe he can make that step up. We know that the Haas car isn't going to improve, so we need to see the drivers improve. Yes, they're both rookies, but I think that maybe there is areas of improvement. Now, France, it was a little bit different. Mick obviously gets into Q2, and that makes Mazepin look even worse because Mick now has that Q2 on his card. You know, people are going to be looking back through the season, looking at rating these two drivers against one another. And yes, obviously, Kimi, Latifi, he beat those out to get into Q2. Tsunoda and Stroll didn't set a time in France, which kind of helped Mick get up to there. But in terms of race pace, he was, again, only 0.3 off of Mick Schumacher. He's slowly closing that gap. You know, we were looking at 0.5s up to a second every single lap when it came to Portugal and Imola. Now we're closing that gap down. It's now 0.1, 0.3, and he's getting closer and closer still. And they've kind of shown that under the right conditions, they can get into Q2. And under the right conditions, the Haas can perform up against those Alfa Romeos and Williamses if it's the right track at the right time. This double header for me was the best opportunity to see what Mazepin could really do. How much could he improve from one weekend to another on the exact same track? I absolutely love the idea of a double header in a Formula One Grand Prix. Maybe that is just me being a bit of a mathsy person, but having this double header, having the Styrian Grand Prix and the Austrian Grand Prix, the same track, it's actually a short track, and it's very technical. So it showed exactly how much improvement the likes of Tsunoda, Mick Schumacher, Mazepin could make when visiting the same track again a week apart and knowing exactly what is expected of them. And actually, when it came to the Styrian Grand Prix, he wasn't too bad at all. If we look at Mazepin's times versus Mick Schumacher's times, again, a 10th or so, nearly 2 tenths off Mick in terms of the qualifying pace, but nearly a second off of him in the race pace. And it doesn't matter too much because, again, as I was saying, this is a good starting point for Mazepin. At least he's got something to aim at. This is a really good opportunity for him to catch up in terms of where he is compared to his teammate. And just for clarity, he was 1.1 seconds off P15, which was Giovinazzi. In terms of his improvements, though, he did much, much better the second time around. This time, he was only 0.5 off of him in the race and 0.5 off of him in qualifying. Actually down to 0.4 in the race. So he was edging that race pace closer and closer together. And again, I think personally, if Mick Schumacher and Mazepin are about 0.3 off of one another in the race, then Mazepin has had a pretty good weekend for me. Because Mick Schumacher is showing that he is the better of the two drivers. I don't think that is under any sort of question, but it's how close can Mazepin actually get, and can Mazepin show that he is worthy of that Formula 1 seat moving forward. And then, again, in the Austrian Grand Prix, he was 1.2 off of Giovinazzi in 15. So his gap to the field was exactly the same in qualifying, but his gap to Mick Schumacher in qualifying was a little bit more, but actually in the race where it matters was a lot less, gained about 0.6 of a second per lap in terms of the race. So he is slowly making improvements. And just in terms of his qualifying improvement and his race improvement, he improved his time by 0.2 in quali. Yes, Mick improved his time even more, hence that gap was there, but that's not too bad. He is improving upon himself, and he improved his race pace by 1.2 seconds. That is a massive jump, and again, shows maybe an inkling of there could be something for Nikita Mazepin moving forward in Formula 1. The British Grand Prix, there wasn't too much to take away. Again, he was 0.3 off of Mick in qualifying and 0.1 off of him per lap in the race. And he was about 1 second off of Stroll, who finished P15 in terms of qualifying. So again, just narrowing that gap down to the rest of the field, but specifically Mick Schumacher narrowing it down a lot more. And then Hungary, there wasn't really much we could take away, because Hungary, Mick Schumacher doesn't get to qualify again, smashes it in FP3, and Mazepin DNFs in the race. And I think the last sort of point I'd like to make is, when it comes to crashes, I think Mick Schumacher is getting a really easy ride of it compared to Mazepin. Mazepin, known as Mazespin, that kind of thing. But Mick Schumacher has actually cost nearly 3 times the amount to Haas in terms of damages. In terms of damages, Mick has just over $3 million worth of damage, whereas Nikita Mazepin has done under $1 million worth of damage to that Haas car. And actually, Yuki Tsunoda has done 2.1 million. So I think he gets a bad rep for not being on track very often, when actually there's other drivers, a lot of other drivers, that are ahead of him in terms of how much they've actually cost the team over the course of the season. But that is an overall look at the statistics. For me, Mazepin has massively improved, and there are shining lights in there. Azerbaijan, Austria, they show just tiny little inklings that maybe Mazepin isn't going to be one of those drivers that disappears into nothingness after he leaves Formula 1. You know, possibly he could, with a different car, with a team set up that isn't, you know, 2 rookies, with someone who can maybe guide him a little bit, I could see Mazepin maybe making a step up and being a fairly decent Formula 1 driver in the future. I know that that's maybe a little bit of a controversial statement, especially as people absolutely love to hate him. But as I say, I'm being subjective of just his racing. I'm not talking about him as a person. You know, the Haas cars this season, unfortunately, just are never going to match the race pace of anybody else. And it's difficult to know. That's why I've done so much comparison between him and Mick Schumacher. Maybe next year when the Haas car is comparable to another car on the grid in some way. Like, I think this Haas car is so much worse than the Williams car or the Alfa Romeo car in front of it that you can't really compare them to one another. But I'd love to know, what do you think in the comments down below? Is Mazepin good enough to make it in Formula 1 in the long term? Or as soon as the money is no longer needed, is he going to sort of step aside and get out of here as quickly as possible? Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for 3,000 subscribers. It's been an absolute dream. I'm going to be live for the Belgian Grand Prix Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I hope to see you there. I will see you next time.